The doors of the courtroom slammed open, and for an instant time itself appeared to stand still. The solid wooden panels crashed back against the walls, ringing out like thunder in the room. Every individual present turned together, their heads swiveling toward the noise. And then, a hush. All eyes rested upon Gwen Brown. Her body occupied the doorway, but she didn't walk in with confidence. No, she walked with a blend of shaking determination and silent anguish. Her shoulders were rigid, hunched back as though straining to stand taller than the weight that threatened to bear down on her. Her face was ashen, lips clenched together, her eyes weary but shining with something that surprised everyone who laid eyes on her: the flame of truth. This was not Gwen Brown that her family used to know. The lively, outspoken daughter had been molded by sorrow. 6 months before, she had harbored a hope that ought to have matured into happiness. A pregnancy that had held out the promise of a new page in her life. But that page had ended in tragedy. A loss too profound to quantify had reduced her world to nothing but vacancy and grief. Since then, her reflection in the mirror had been a stranger. Her bright smile was now gone, her face pale from sleepless nights and tears that refused to cease. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of countless nights spent lying awake, replaying memories she wished she could erase. Grief had etched lines in her face, each one a reminder of the wars she fought silently. Now, standing in court, Gwen appeared fragile, vulnerable, a shadow of the woman she had once been, and yet hidden beneath that fragile facade, something else glowed, something potent. Behind those weary eyes smoldered a fire people had never seen. She stepped into the courtroom for the first time, and the atmosphere became thick. Journalists wrote in frantic motion. Spectators leaned forward, trying to hear every word. Her siblings exchanged uneasy glances, talking in hushed tones, but no one was willing to shatter the silence. And then there was Kody Brown. Slouching in the other side of the courtroom, he crossed his arms firmly over his chest. His face was smug, nearly expressionless, as if this whole debacle was beneath him. To him, it was nothing more than another family drama, another chance to guard his reputation and his ego. He had dealt with drama in the past: wives walking out, children acting out, photographers documenting every turn and curve of his dysfunctional life. To him, this was no different. But not for Gwen. This wasn't about money or neglect. This wasn't about favoritism or promises broken. This was about her heart, about the worst moment of her life, about the father who had turned his back on her when she needed him most. Her heels clicked against the tile floor softly as she walked toward her seat. Every step was laden with 6 months of quiet anguish, 6 months of unanswered telephone calls, 6 months of aloneness, while her father labored for Robin's universe, 6 months of questioning why her agony meant so little. The courtroom resembled a stage, every minute detail exaggerated under the fluorescent lights. Gwen's hands were shaking a little as she set down the papers she was carrying, not because she was nervous, but because the feelings within her were too big to fit. Her mother, Kody Brown, was sitting in the audience. Her eyes welled with tears as she saw her daughter pass. Kody had rocked Gwen through sleepless nights, spoken softly into her ear when no words seemed comforting enough, and reminded her that in sorrow, she was never alone. But Kody knew also that this battle needed to be Gwen's. No one else could fight her battle. Janelle also sat close by, her face stern. She had always respected Gwen for her boldness, but in that moment she witnessed a different type of courage, born not out of defiance, but from survival. Mary, usually reserved and quiet, leaned forward in her chair, looking on Kody with narrowed eyes, as if quietly challenging him to downplay the suffering his daughter bore. The silence in the room became intolerable, interrupted only by the subtle squeak of Gwen's chair as she finally sat down. No one said anything for a very long time. The judge looked down at his papers, clearly recognizing that this was no ordinary case, but something much more emotionally charged. Gwen took a deep breath. Her chest fell and rose, bracing herself against the whirlwind of feelings inside her. She glanced over the room again at her father. He regarded her for a brief moment before looking away, his jaw clenched, his face inscrutable, and in that instant, Gwen realized the reality she'd been refusing to accept for 6 months. She was never going to have the father she'd envisioned. He was never going to be the man she'd expected him to be. But now, it did not matter. Today she wasn't here to beg for attention or love. She wasn't here to plead for what rightfully should have been delivered as an act of love. She was here to fight. For her dignity, for her truth, for her voice that had been silenced for far too long. She sat up straight, the shake in her hands subsiding as resolve had stepped in. Her sorrow was still present, carved into each line on her face. But sorrow was no longer her flaw. It was her tool. The judge's gavel came down light on the desk, calling the court to attention. Chatter ceased immediately, leaving only the crisp sound of wood against wood echoing in the room. Court is now in session, the judge announced. And with that, Gwen Brown's fight started. The courtroom was silent, as Gwen Brown stood up. The judge nodded, and the bailiff led her to the witness stand. Her every step seemed to resonate, a beat of quivering rebellion and unspoken anguish. When she finally sat, the weight of the instant rested upon her chest. The clerk extended a Bible. Gwen's hand lay upon it, voice whispery but firm as she promised to tell the truth. This oath was not for the court alone, she thought, but for herself, for those standing by, and for all the moments she'd been muted. The room grew quiet once more. The judge settled his spectacles and intoned, "Miss Brown, please proceed." Gwen swallowed hard, her gaze running over the courtroom before fastening on her dad. Kody sat stiff, arms crossed, his face impassive, although a flash of unease gave him away. Her lips opened, her voice low at first. 6 months ago, I experienced the most difficult period of my life. The words broke the silence, and they carried weight that fell thick upon all ears that heard them. She hesitated, collecting herself, before going on. I was pregnant. I held hope with me, day after day, dreaming of what my life would be like, what sort of parent I could be, how I would keep them safe and love them. But then, her voice cracked. Christine softly gasped from the audience, holding a tissue, and Janelle glanced down at her lap, both of her eyes shining. Gwen struggled to continue, but then it was gone. In one instant, all the things I was holding on to vanished, and I was left broken, in pain and alone. The words themselves had the weight of her sorrow, but her shaking hands, her trembling lips, and the tears welling up in her eyes, made it impossible not to stare. She took a wobbly breath, and then her eyes narrowed. Her eyes fixed on her father's, and the sadness in her voice turned into something more potent. "And you weren't there." The courtroom gasped. Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his expression tightening, but Gwen did not release the moment. "You never called me once. You never asked me how I was doing. You never asked me if I could get out of bed, if I could eat, if I could even breathe after what occurred. When I needed you, when I needed a father, most, you weren't there." Her voice rose, with every word slamming home like a hammer. "You weren't absent. You were absent by choice." The judge held up a hand, calling for order as murmurs spread through the courtroom. But Gwen wasn't done. She breathed once more deeply, struggling to get the words past the lump in her throat. "Do you have any idea what it's like to cry into your pillow every night, hoping the phone will ring, hoping your father will care enough to call and ask if you're all right? Do you have any idea what it's like to know that call will never ring? That your suffering means nothing to the man who's supposed to guard you?" Her words hurt. Christine pressed her fist against her mouth, to stifle her crying. Mary blinked hard, as if she was fighting hers. Janelle gritted her teeth, staring at Kody with silent anger. Gwen's eyes remained fixed on her father. "While I lay in a hospital bed, sick and heartbroken, you were smiling on TV, lying to the world that everything was okay. While I grieved, you were laughing at family dinners with Robin. While I prayed to God for strength, you weren't even aware I was gone." She wept then, her voice shaking as she brushed at tears. But she continued. "You speak of being a leader, of being a man of faith, of leading this family. But what is the kind of leader who leaves his daughter in her time of deepest sorrow? What is the kind of father who allows his child to be alone in the grieving? The silence that followed her words was oppressive. Every individual in the room sensed the gravity of her accusation, the brutal honesty of her truth. Kody attempted to shift once more, his jaw working, but he still didn't say anything. His silence only served to strengthen Gwen's voice. She went on, her voice fading softer but no less strong. I don't stand before you today asking for love or attention. I don't require your sympathy. What I require, what I am entitled to, is recognition. I require the truth to be said aloud. I require this court and society to understand that my hurt was genuine, and that my father made the decision to deny it. She took a deep breath, her chest expanding and then falling as she collected herself. Then with unflinching bravery she continued. I am not going to let my story be taken from me. I am not going to let my pain be called drama. My sadness is worthy of consideration. And if you are not going to say it, then I will. You failed me. The courtroom erupted in whispers, the tension overloading. The gavel of the judge crashed down on the desk, calling for silence, but harm was already done. Gwen's truth had cut through the room, leaving no room for denial. Christine wiped away her tears, murmuring, "That's my girl." Janelle nodded emphatically, pride illuminating her eyes. Even Mary, normally reserved, relaxed back in her chair, lips clenched tight, as if she too wished to rise and applaud. Gwen settled back in the witness stand, her breathing labored, her fingers digging into the rail. The grief that had at one time drained her now strengthened her. For the first time in 6 months, she felt lighter, not whole, but stronger, because at last her voice had been heard. And on the other side of the room, Kody Brown sat white and shaken, his carefully constructed facade of control slowly unraveling. The courtroom realized now, Gwen was not only a grieving daughter, she was a survivor, and her reality could not be denied. The judge shifted his glasses, leaned forward a little, and nodded. Miss Brown, do you have additional testimony to offer? Gwen took a deep breath, her shaking hands dipping down to the folder on her lap. Very slowly, very carefully, she lifted it onto the witness stand. The plain manila folder appeared plain, almost brittle, but within it was the weapon she had been stockpiling for months. The truth in black and white. As she opened it, the courtroom fell silent once more. Reporters poised their pens, cameras focused in, and even the slightest rustle of paper sounded deafening in the quiet. Gwen's gaze did not waver from her father as she removed the first set of documents. These, she explained, her voice more stable now, are accounting documents, bank statements, transfers, receipts, all last year. She clutched the papers tightly, knuckles white, as if hanging on to the actual proof of her father's deceit gave her strength. Kody shifted in his chair, his arms crossing at the elbow, relaxing. For the first time that day, his arrogant mask slipped, his eyes darkened, his lips curled into a hard line. He knew what was to come. Gwen went on, her tone sharp, crisp, slicing through the air like glass. While I lay in a hospital bed, frail and heartbroken, you were making transfers. While I was gathering myself, you were pouring thousands into Robin's home, vacations, luxuries, bills that had nothing to do with survival, nothing to do with family. She held the first paper high for the judge to read. Here, a transfer of $10,000, dated 3 days after my loss. 3 days. Do you know what I was doing that day? I was crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I was praying for comfort to God. And you were sending money to Robin. Gasp waves spread across the courtroom. Christine pressed her hand against her chest, her face going white with anger. Janelle shook her head in disbelief, muttering to herself, "Unbelievable." Mary leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Kody, her face immobile but tense, as if she was seeing him naked for the first time. Gwen's voice didn't shake. She extracted another sheet from the folder. Another one. A payment for a vacation package. The same week I called you. Do you recall? I left you a voicemail, pleading with you to just say something, anything, to make me think you cared. Do you recall what you said? She leaned in, her eyes blazing. Nothing. Because you never called back. The courtroom hummed with whispers. The judge rapped his gavel once, quieting the crowd, but even he rocked forward, his expression somber. Kody moved at last, his tone low but heard. This is absurd. I supported this family. I provided. Gwen exclaimed, interrupting him, her voice angry. You did not provide for me. You did not provide comfort, or love, or even an ounce of concern. You provided excuses. You provided money where it seemed to enhance your image. You provided for Robin, because she was your priority. But me? I was invisible. Her words hung suspended in the air. Christine's tears began to turn to anger. She leaned over to Janelle and whispered, loud enough for others to hear. He always picked Robin. Always. Janelle nodded sternly, her arms folded as she glared daggers at Kody. Gwen spread more papers over the stand, unfolding them like a trail of evidence no one could dispute. These aren't numbers. These are decisions. Each dollar you spent was a decision. And every time you decided on Robin, you decided not to be present for me. Her voice broke then, not from vulnerability, but from the weight of truth. I don't want your money, Dad. I never did. I wanted your attention. I wanted you to look at me and say that you cared. But what I got was declarations like these. I got evidence that during my worst moments, your allegiance wasn't to your daughter. It was to someone else's comfort. The silence that ensued was choking. The proof remained on the stand. Impossible to deny. Impossible to refute. Gwen stared down at it, and back up at her father. For 6 months, I bore the weight of loss. And for 6 months, I bore the weight of being forgotten. Today, I'm dropping that weight. Today, I want this court to know what kind of man you are. Not the father you fake on TV, but the man who left his daughter in silence and supported another life. The words hit harder than any sheet of paper ever could. Kody's face turned red. He parted his lips to answer, but shut them again, his throat constricting. For once, he appeared speechless. Gwen shifted back, her tone gentle but unfaltering. This is not only about neglect. This is betrayal, and I won't let that be kept secret anymore. Christine's muffled sobs turned to prideful whispers. She's so strong. She told no one in particular. Mary nodded slowly, her own eyes welling up with something between sadness and vindication. Even Janelle, who had long since lost patience with Kody's excuses, permitted herself the barest flicker of a smile of approval. The judge cleared his throat, shattering the tension. The evidence will be entered into the record. The court recognizes the importance of these documents. His voice was firm, but his eyes revealed the seriousness of what had just been disclosed. Gwen let out a breath, her shoulders dipping slightly. The folder was empty now, its contents revealed to everyone. It wasn't paper anymore. It was her story, her evidence, her truth. It had been months since she'd been carrying around sadness as her shadow, but today she'd turned it into power. The courtroom had witnessed it. Her family had witnessed it, and most of all, her father had had to confront it. The silence came back, heavy and irrefutable, and in that silence, Gwen Brown found her voice again. The courtroom was charged, the atmosphere heavy with whispers and suppressed gasps following Gwen's compelling testimony. The financial records sat on the judge's table, condemnatory in their simplicity. Gwen leaned back in the witness stand, her breathing calm, although her eyes still sparkled with tears. It was Kody's turn. The judge looked at him. Mr. Brown, you can speak. Kody got up slowly, standing upright, his face a picture of outrage. He smoothed out the suit jacket, breathed deeply, and scanned the courtroom as if everyone was out to get him. At last, he started. I have done everything in my power to provide for my family, he said, his voice loud and commanding, as if sheer volume could make his words true. I've sacrificed. I've worked. I've carried the burden of a household bigger than most men could ever dream of. And now I'm being painted as some kind of villain, because my daughter doesn't understand how hard I've had to work to keep this family together. The words were laced with defensiveness, but they sounded hollow in the ensuing silence. Christine snorted out loud. Janelle folded her arms tightly, and Gwen's face hardened. Kody continued, at his wits' end. Yeah, I spent money. Yeah, I made decisions. But those decisions were for the benefit of the family. Robin and her children needed stability. They needed security, and I provided that to them. Isn't that what a father is required to do? Provide, protect? He threw his arms wide, his voice growing louder with every syllable. This has nothing to do with neglect. This is about having the right point of view. Gwen hurts, and I feel sorry for her distress. But I am not responsible for all adversity my children experience. I am not omnipresent. I cannot heal all wounds. I did what I could do. His words rang hollow, but instead of garnering sympathy, they hit the floor. The courtroom regarded him with icy, unbelieving eyes. He squirmed, his voice breaking. Then Gwen spoke. Her voice sliced through his like a bolt of lightning. Best you could. The room stopped moving. Gwen strained forward in the witness stand, her fingers clasped around the edges, her gaze fixed on her father with unyielding anger. You actually want to call this your best? Because if this is the best you can do, then I feel sorry for you. Kody's face flushed. You don't understand. No, Gwen's voice lifted, strong and unafraid. I get it. I get that when I was in a hospital bed, you were off playing house with Robin. I get that while I spent every night crying myself to sleep, you were explaining to cameras that your family was better than ever. I get that your idea of providing has nothing to do with love, or compassion, or being there when it counts. Her voice snapped like a whip. Christine's head bobbed up and down in furious agreement. Her hand clapped to her mouth to suppress her own cry of assent. Janelle grumbled. That's the truth. Under her breath, loudly enough for everyone in the front row to hear. Even Mary, usually quiet on the sidelines, leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with vindication. Kody attempted again, his voice trembling now. I never left you, Gwen. I never appeared. She retorted in a flash. Do you think sending money to one home makes you a father? Do you think standing in front of cameras and acting as if everything is okay makes you a man? No, Dad. To be a father is to appear when your child is shattered. It's to hold their hand when they can't stand. It's to listen when their heart is broken. And you did none of those things. Her voice broke then. But it was not weakness. It was raw truth. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes never left the face of her father. The courtroom was charged. Reporters wrote frantically, seeing headlines in every word. Onlookers leaned forward, captivated. The judge rapped his gavel once, reminding all to keep their order. But even he did not break the flow of Gwen. Kody's voice grew, desperate and defensive. You're exaggerating. You're twisting everything to make me out to be a monster. I had obligations I had to juggle. Balance? Gwen spit out the word as venom. Do you want me to read my journal? Do you want me to tell you the nights I prayed for God to give me strength because my own father wouldn't even answer the phone? Do you want me to produce the hospital bills that were stacked up when you took Robin on holiday? Is this your balance? Is this your sacrifice? Kody's lips parted, but nothing was spoken. His throat jerked up and down as he swallowed hard, his face a whirlwind of anger and fear. For the first time, the powerful patriarch of the Brown family remained silent, his defenses shed. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to regain order. Miss Brown, please let your father complete his statement. But Gwen wasn't done. She faced the judge, her tone steady but stern. Your Honor, respectfully, I don't need to hear any excuses. I've lived with them my entire life. Today I want the truth. And the truth is this. He chose Robin. He chose money. He chose himself. But he never chose me. The judge regarded her for an instant before nodding once, letting her words linger in the air. The following silence was oppressive. Christine wiped her tears and whispered to the woman beside her. She's saying what we've all felt. Janelle's arms tightened across her chest, her jaw clenched with anger. Mary sat back slowly, her eyes narrowing at Kody, as if she too could finally admit what she had long denied. Kody dropped his eyes, his fingers clenched into fists around the tabletop. He appeared smaller now, less the authoritarian patriarch he had always purported to be, and more like a man trapped by fact. Gwen sat back in her chair, breathing hard but her gaze stern. Her voice relaxed but resonated with the weight of conclusion. You constructed an empire on image and control, Dad. But today I'm dismantling it with the one thing you can't shut up. The truth. The words struck like a gavel itself, slamming up against the courtroom walls, unable to be denied. And at that instant everyone knew. Kody Brown's defense had fallen apart, and Gwen Brown had already won the war of truth. The courtroom was silent, but the silence wasn't empty. It was charged like before a storm would erupt.
Gwen's last words still hung in the air like smoke. You created an empire on control and image, Dad, but today I'm dismantling it with the only thing that you can't shut up. Truth? The judge rested back in his chair, his face a mask. He tapped his pen gently against his papers, his gaze raking over the evidence presented to him. The bank statements, Gwen's diary entries, the testimonies that had shattered the Brown family's carefully built facade. Brown, the judge spoke at last, his voice unyielding but even. Your daughter's testimony speaks of neglect that cannot be dismissed. Though this court is not here to unravel every scar of your family history, it is here to hear the truth before us. And the truth is that your choices, your financial priorities, and your absence have resulted in measurable harm to your daughter. Kody leaned back in his seat, his lips pursed, his eyes moving frantically as if seeking a means of escape. There was none. The judge went on. Miss Gwen Brown, your bravery today has been remarkable. The court acknowledges the sorrow you have borne, and the courage it has required to present it here. Christine's hand sprang to her mouth, her shoulders convulsing with sobs. Janelle put a hand on her arm, squeezing. Mary closed her eyes and breathed out slowly, as if she'd been holding it since forever. Now concerning this court's ruling, the judge announced, hesitating just long enough for the room to grow electric with tension. We find in the favor of Miss Gwen Brown. Mr. Brown, you are directed to pay financial reparation for the carelessness exhibited in the course of her recuperation. More significantly, let it be stated that your inabilities in maintaining the duties of fatherhood have been duly acknowledged. The gavel struck with a harsh crack. The noise reverberated like thunder. For a moment the room remained motionless, near suspended in shock at the finality of it. Gwen closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, her shoulders relaxed, the burden of 6 months of unspoken anguish finally easing from her shoulders. Tears sprang to her eyes, but these were not the tears of loss that had come before. These were tears of release, of triumph, of freedom. Kody slumped in the chair, his face ashen, his chest heaving in and out rapidly. For once the patriarch had no words, no speeches, no excuses, no louder than thunder voice to silence the truth. Nothing but silence. Gwen slowly stood up. The courtroom waited as she stood, her body shaking but gaining strength with each step. She turned, not to the judge, not to the reporters scribbling down what she said, but to her father. Dad, she spoke gently, the voice cutting clearly through the room. I didn't show up today because I was after money or revenge. I came because I needed you to listen to me, see me, understand the hurt your decisions inflicted. But you couldn't even manage that. And that's all right, because I don't require your approval anymore. I have my truth. And that is sufficient. Christine's tears burst forth, wild and uncontained. Janelle's eyes welled over as she shook her head in savage concurrence. Even Mary, usually reserved, brushed one tear from her face. Robin, slumped in the corner, covered her eyes, her expression pinched with discomfort. She shifted uneasily in her seat, a reminder of the imbalance Gwen had just revealed. The journalists leaned forward, pencils scratching harder, shutters clicking like maddened applause. The world soon would learn this moment, the day that Gwen Brown stepped up against the man who had professed to be the center of their family, and taught him the mirror of truth. Gwen headed back to her seat, but she didn't sit down. She stood before the courtroom one last time. Her hands were slightly shaking, but her voice was so strong that everyone hearing her was left breathless. For 6 months, I walked in shadows, she started. I believed my suffering made me vulnerable. I believed that keeping quiet would shield me. But keeping quiet only covers those who inflict the pain. Today, I decided to be heard. And in being heard, I regained my strength.
Her gaze took in the room. Over the judge, the jury, the onlookers, and last, her family. If I want you to remember one thing from this, it is this. You don't need someone else's love to be worthy. You don't need someone else's permission to heal. You have the power to stand, to fight, and to find your voice again. The courtroom erupted in soft murmurs, some nodding, others wiping their eyes. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his face softened by her words. Christine stood up, unable to stay seated any longer, and pulled Gwen into her arms. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Janelle joined them, wrapping her arms around both, their embrace a circle of strength that no gavel could break. Mary paused, then rose from her seat and began to make a slow way toward them. She touched her hand to Gwen's shoulder and whispered, "You did something I never could. You told the truth." Gwen smiled weakly, her tears streaming freely now. "We all needed it," she whispered. Kody sat alone, eyes moving between wives and daughter, his face a tempest of anger, shame, and shock. But no one turned to him. No one grasped for him. The man who had once been at the center of it all sat on the periphery of his own family, witnessing the truth he'd refused to see destroy his kingdom. The bailiff ordered the court adjourned as the judge banged it down. The reporters scurried towards the doors to get their reports written, camera bulbs flashing like lightning across the courtroom. But Gwen no longer saw them. She stood among the circle of women who had been broken and were now made whole, her breast heaving with a deep breath. For the first time in months, in grief, in emptiness, she felt whole. As they left the courtroom side by side, Christine leaned over and breathed, "This isn't the end, this is the beginning." And Gwen nodded, her eyes not gleaming with tears, but with resolve. Because today wasn't all about a courtroom, or a verdict, or the secrets of a broken family. Today was about Gwen Brown emerging from the darkness of suffering and into the brilliance of her own power. Today was about taking back her voice. And today was the beginning of the end for Kody Brown's kingdom of domination, and the dawn of Gwen Brown's unbreakable truth.